welcome to Exposure Therapy, and welcome back to Kendra. Kendra, you were actually my very first podcast guest back at the end of January there when the first episode of this launched. So thanks for coming back. I'm excited to have you and to hear about the current project you have going on. So anyways, welcome back. How have you been since the last time we spoke?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I was so excited and thought of you right away when I wanted to kind of start sharing this with people. It's really cool also as like an observer to see how your podcast is growing. And I'm excited to see the stories and the people you're going to continue to highlight. It's an awesome project.
Oh, cheers. Thanks. Yeah. So you, last time we spoke, we were talking about your medical photography and more your documentary side of things. And you brought a photo. I'll just bring this one up here onto the last podcast. Whoop, here. And you talked about this a little bit and some of the things that you do in your hometown of Hamilton. So I'll stop at that, and then maybe you can take it from there.
Well, I started this project really like right before I had originally spoken to you. And I was concentrating on trying to document as like comprehensively as possible the human nests of Hamilton. There's like basically an epidemic of people that are struggling, being unhoused and with lack of resources in Hamilton. And I wanted to really immerse myself in this project, both capturing it and also just like in the social issue itself, learn more about it. I'm new to this area, and I have never lived in a place where it was such like a rampant issue, and also like a really kind of ignored issue. So that was kind of what got me excited about this project. And originally I was like on the hunt for evidence of human activity, I would say. I was looking for human nests and I wanted to capture them. I was really, really focused in like the arc of human inclusion to not take pictures of people. I was really concerned about people being able to be completely anonymous, and like respecting like their rights and privacy. I was worried about consent and like the inability to withdraw consent if someone had changed their mind about being involved in the project later on. But there's been like an absolute undeniable change in where this project has gone as my both like social, academic, and like actual physical research of like shooting kind of progressed. I realized that these aren't like abandoned nests. Right? These are actual physical nests that are being lived in by actual individuals right now. These nests disappear almost within like minutes, it seems, as people who are transient, like kind of like move around and, work on survival. So I started to evolve the project as I was shooting to also include the people that live in this nest, not in a portrait style, but just like their actual like existence as they were living in the nest. So the project has definitely gone on a little train ride since we last spoke, but I'm really excited to kind of share where it is right now and continue working on it in the future.
Remind me how long you've been in Hamilton for?
So I grew up outside of Hamilton in Pembroke. I spent probably 18 years there. And then I ran away to Kingston, Ontario for my like budding adolescence and school years. And I've recently come back like in the last 5 years or so to this area. And it has been like an absolute delight getting to know the kind of GTA area again as an adult, but also there's, huge things that I didn't fully understand when I was I think like a youth. And there was parts of the city, of course, that as like a young woman, you're like not supposed to go to. So now that I'm a confident adult, seeing the world, trying new things, you are fully educated in everything the city has to offer. And that has really opened my eyes to a lot more.
In the last 5 years since you've been back, have you noticed have you noticed an increase? And if so, what kind of increase? Like, how has that manifested in front of your very eyes of these nests and of this homelessness condition? And like, you obviously kind of saw it enough to develop a bit of a passion for it and a curiosity for it. So what's that progression been like for the past 5 years?
Definitely COVID obviously had a huge impact. I think that Hamilton wasn't the only city that saw a rise in homelessness because of like lack of resources, lack of shelter, and of course, like the financial difficulties that the pandemic brought upon almost everyone, honestly. So that was something that was like physically obvious. You could see during the pandemic that more and more people were looking like freshly unhoused. I think that sometimes you can see like stories of the streets in people when you look at them. You can tell that, you know, they've been struggling to survive. They've been living a hard life, but they're doing it, you know, on their own. They're clearly doing it successfully, right? They're alive. They're participating in reality with you. But what I also was seeing was, you know, these like people that looked like lost and confused with like bags of stuff, you know, that had been almost like immediately displaced. Like it looked very recent. So that was something that I was noticing a lot more, as well as in Hamilton in particular, a huge rise in women. There are more homeless women in Hamilton than men, which is something that
different than the norm.
I really was surprised. Like I had to do some research to be like, are we sure this is true, guys? I was reading it in the Hamilton Spectator, and I wanted to kind of do my own due diligence as I was doing my research. And there's of course the danger aspect to women being on the street. There's, you know, tons of supports that we could talk about for hours that people need, who are like experiencing like a lack of housing. But the project themselves in itself, there was less women who were willing to be involved in this project. I think like the fear of having your face shared and like a particular point in time is a fear. There were some people that I didn't want to document around certain houses because they are known to be shelters or refuges for people. And there are also some like secret addresses that are for women who are like currently and actively in dangerous situations. And I just really wanted to be delicate around that and not kind of like accidentally do more damage than good with the work that I was doing.
Do you have you in your research, have you found a reason that they've given as to why the disparity now, like why all of a sudden there's more women homeless than men in the Hamilton area in particular? Because it sounds concrete. That sounds like a unique scenario. So I'm just curious what reasons that they maybe people come up with for that.
I'm going to continue to investigate this, and I hope to have something that can be like verified to share in the future. But there are groups of homeless people or people that are struggling with like a lack of shelter, where people are actually brought to Hamilton from other places. So that could be potentially impacting the situation. In some municipalities in Ontario, you can get tickets for, you know, residing in places that you don't actually have an address in or can't prove that you know, actually live in. So sometimes people are brought to Hamilton, and that could be impacting things. We also do in the downtown core have a lot of like kind of like known resources for people to use. So people who are struggling might kind of be drawn to the area because of like the familiar like table talk names that people know, like, oh, this place exists, I can go there for help.
Okay. All right. So let's take a look at some of these photos. I don't know if there's anywhere you want to start. Let's go with this one.
No, you can definitely share. One of the cool things that I got to do while I was taking photos was also start to gather quotes from people. Sometimes the people that were in the photos weren't willing to, you know, give quotes, but I had the opportunity to talk to people who have experienced being unhoused in Hamilton like for years. So I got some cool quotes from them. And so the plan is to share some of those quotes alongside these photos to really like give the human aspect to this experience of living on the streets.
Excellent. So let's talk about this one here.
So this is a woman. The thing that really struck me about her is what I mentioned earlier, is that she was like so obviously recently unhoused. She had all of her stuff with her. You could see like little bits of like name brand things. You could tell basically that this person had not been long for the streets. So those things are always curious to me. I think that a lot of people who are experiencing like a lack of support financially in housing, whatever, always think it's temporary. And then of course can turn into like a longer battle. So it was interesting to talk to this person and feel like the tangible hope and the lack of permanence in their perspective about what they were experiencing versus some of the people that I had talked to who have been living on the street for like 10 to 12, 13 years, who are like, this is my life, this is it, you know, like this is where I'm going to be until they find my body kind of thing.
Is this in Burlington, this one?
This one is exactly where Burlington like kind of goes into Hamilton.
Okay.
It's right outside my house, funny enough. That's why I was happy that you chose this one first, because this is one of the first things that I see as I'm going off There's a bridge that connects Burlington to Hamilton, right in this area. And I think that physical barrier is also one of the things that separates like the local people, but doesn't separate people that are unhoused. There's, you'll see people on both sides of the bridge one day to the next, which is something that is really cool.
Question for you. In your experiences interviewing these people, have you noticed a difference? Because you said there's a difference in some of them, it just happened to them, some circumstance, and they're like, oh, it's only temporary. And then some have been doing it for 12, 13 years, and that's just their life now. Can you pinpoint one or a handful of differences in what would cause someone just, to have that mindset, like, oh, this is temporary, I'll be back on my feet soon, versus, oh, this is just the way it is now? Like, when does someone cross over from one worldview to the next?
I think that is definitely probably personal based on like each individual story. But I think that for everyone, it's probably part of like the survival instinct. We need to personally justify things to ourselves so we can keep fighting. We can keep, trying to survive, trying to, share and interact with society in whatever way it is that we're doing it at that time. So I definitely know that if I were to ever experience something like this, that like, this is just for tonight, would for sure be a mantra that I would have to cling on to in order to get through the night.
And getting through the night, man. Is this done? Well, you go ahead. I was just going to say, it looks like it's around Dundurn, but it could be anywhere.
So that whole area, it's so cool that you're familiar with this. Anywhere that you'll see like this, like limestoney looking stone, that people like to use it because it's like a natural wall. This is actually by the YMCA. In Hamilton, there was a large underpass near like Hunter Street that a lot of people in community had gathered around for years, really, especially during the pandemic, to create a community, basically like a tent city. Recently, it has been shut down, and these people are kind of displaced now in the area about the street. So from the YMCA to City Hall, you'll see all of this type of stonework, and there is just like, I'd say at least 50 tents at all times being, erected or moved around in this area. This photo doesn't really offer how cold and wet it was and is down there. And one of the important parts of this project was that I shot it through the winter. So obviously, even hot places, have people that are struggling with being unhoused. But in Canada, in Ontario specifically, and where you are in Alberta, you can die within hours of being inappropriately exposed to the weather, to the elements throughout the night. So that was one thing that was really important to me through this project, was to show just how brutal and difficult and literally like life ending it can be to be on the streets in this weather.
When you're talking about those tent cities and kind of these natural walls, and I guess little kind of less traveled pockets they try to house themselves in. Yes.
Staying away from the general public is important so that they can continue to exist without having to, interact with police or other law enforcement. The other thing that's important too is being close to resources. There are multiple institutions like the YMCA who do offer community support. So being able to access those on foot or by bicycle is super important for the literal survival of these people as well.
Yeah. So what kind of community do they have? Is it just kind of every person for themselves, or do they form some sort of bonding experience here where they form a kind of a makeshift community? Like have you noticed anything like the relationships there develop in a certain way?
That was one of the most profound and beautiful things that I got to experience throughout the months that I was going down to find and shoot these nests, was like the abundance of community and loyalty and just like pure human respect, despite the fact that these people literally had nothing but their dignity. And in some cases, not even that. Mm-hmm. There's going to be, things to fear like violence and theft. There's like the undeniable like drugs and alcohol and addiction that are rampant throughout these communities. And there's always going to be that like darker side of gathering together when you are living on the edge like this. But what shocked me and just absolutely was, a breath of light in this project was that human recognition that they all had. They know each other's names, they know each other's stories, where they're going, where they're coming from. As people are gathering and sharing supplies, if they can't use something, they'll like save it for their buddy. In cases where like we instinctually, just as humans, might always want like the biggest piece of cake, they also saw a hierarchy of need that I thought was amazing, because I have always imagined humans to be at their base like a very Lord of the Flies type situation. So to see people literally living that and still finding like grace, to give that bigger piece of cake to another person was absolutely amazing.
To go into these settlements, I guess we'll call them, these camps, and with your camera, not with a cell phone. Like I'm assuming, like not with your cell phone, with your camera, right?
No, I brought a DSLR and a 50, like I mentioned last time, a 50 is my baby, so there was no way I was doing this project without it.
Yeah. So there's some, like, obviously some pictures where you can kind of get them behind them without them noticing you there and get in, or if like you said, having the pictures with no humans actually in the photo itself. But when you're sitting there and taking their picture in their circumstance, especially if you're getting like a story or a quote from them, how did you go about building that relationship and building that trust to get that permission to do that with them?
Each situation was a little bit different. Sometimes there is one photo where you can see a big, huge football field, and there's one young man sitting in his tent in the middle of the field. In that situation, I was able to kind of like make eye contact, say hello from afar, and then kind of like slowly approach, making sure that he knew that I wasn't going to be bringing any like potential danger to him. I, of course, also have to make sure that I'm not being a complete fool, and I'm acknowledging that my own personal safety is also a factor in the situation. But in this case, I basically used like your normal nonverbal cues. I communicated with the person. I was like, hey, I'm taking pictures. I'm doing a project. Do you mind if I take your picture? Do you mind if I take your picture with your face in it? Getting consent was a big deal for me building this project. There were some cases where there was a large group of people that seemed to have like a different energy and kind of like a higher level vibe about the group that was making me also be a little bit more sensitive. So I grabbed a shot of them from behind, just in case once I interacted with them, they were like, no photos, please, ma'am, go away with your scary camera. So these guys, there was like very clearly active drug use going on. In approaching a group of people where this was happening, you obviously have to be sensitive both for their personal safety and your own. And still enough of a glimpse into their life and their reality and their story that I still wanted to capture it despite kind of like those barriers.
And by the looks of it, you actually you got around to the front end and interact with them. Can you tell us rather about what this interaction was like?
So these guys on this side were open to hearing what I had to say. There's a lot of times a little bit of like back and forth conversationally that you have to earn the trust of these people. Sometimes it happens in like 2 or 3 sentences. Sometimes I hang around with them for like half an hour just to like build the friendship before I even ask if I can take their picture. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, they know that's where it's going. They can see the camera in my hand. I've never hidden the camera. I literally carry it, like so basically like a baby in my arm so that I can still be open, not look like I have a weapon, but show them exactly what it is that's going on. So even if I wait until we have a bit of a base of communication to ask them, they know what's going on, when I approach the scene.
During this reminds me a little bit of there's a YouTube channel called Soft White Underbelly. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
No, but I'll check it out after this.
Yeah, really good. So it's a Mark Leda, and don't forgive me if I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly, but he's a photographer and he does interviews with people on Skid Row in Los Angeles, and he takes their portrait. Amazing. And there's a little YouTube channel with their video and their whole story. And I was listening to him on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he was saying that very few of these people that he interviews actually do kind of get out of that rut and kind of make their life better. And it has happened, but seldom. Are there any cases in your experience that you could talk about, you can share, where you have met somebody maybe that either they did make it out, or at least they demonstrated an intent, or they were taking active steps to do that? Or just curious.
So I met one person who I basically was like super excited for, because I saw that, they were excited to be getting off the streets. one of the main issues for supports in Hamilton is that a lot of the shelters, support systems, and kind of like job placement even activities require proof of sobriety. One of the biggest supports I think that these people need, other than like mental health and addiction support, is also just like the freedom to live their lifestyle and get them up on their feet before you start trying to tackle these like larger lifelong struggles of addiction. Telling someone who is an alcoholic that they need to completely sober up by the night to have a safe place to stay, I don't think is sustainable or practical even from like a support level. And that is the main thing that people would talk about all the time. They'd be like, okay, like some people would have ID. So ID and like your personal identification is a huge barrier to getting support, right? If you don't have a driver's license or a proof of person, you can't sign up to get, you know, the food tickets or whatever it is that you're trying to access sometimes. So that's a big problem. And something that people talk about with excitement is, you know, taking steps to get their ID because they know once they get ID, they can get into programs that can potentially house them. But sometimes people end up back on the street. And unfortunately, one of the people that I was super excited for did end up back in the exact same encampment literally 2 weeks later, because if you cannot prove that you are maintaining a life of sobriety, you cannot access the supports. So I don't know, you know, about you, but most even expensive rehab programs that I hear about are longer than, you know, a week or two. So there's like a disconnect, I think, between expectations, you know, of the institution and then practically what change can happen in like a very short period of time.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Like, I don't know. I can imagine like every person's different, but there's got to be a common threads, I think, in people that end up in these circumstances, maybe in terms of trauma for sure.
Yeah.
But like I think of like something like childhood trauma, like maybe somebody was really traumatized as a child, and like how do you, like even with a social program, how do you fix that, right? Like how do you break behavioral patterns that are so ingrained because of, you know, something, you know, just for years and years and years of you know, of being kind of cemented in. It's really, really challenging and really difficult thing to address.
Oh, you're totally right. Therapy is amazing, but it is not an overnight fix-it pill, right? It doesn't matter what you're struggling with. Long-term solutions are always better, but much more difficult to like attain and maintain.
So
today's episode is brought to you by Prairie View Photo Tours. Prairie View Photo Tours invites photographers of all levels to book their all-inclusive, authentic Alberta adventure at pvphototours.com.
Let's talk about this gentleman here. And he looks just out against just like a main road, it seems.
Yes, it is. That is basically where you go from the downtown core onto the highway. And during rush hour in the morning and throughout the afternoon, this is like a absolutely packed, you know, not moving at all road. One of the cool things that I saw, this guy's name is Dimitri. His encampment is literally in the middle. I have another picture in the thing where you might be able to see it, but basically I'll describe it. There's about 200 feet on each side of him, moving forward from here and then on either sides that go back up against housing areas. So this is kind of
this here?
No, but it's similar.
Okay.
Basically, it's like the no man's land in between where people's personal property ends and like the road itself starts. So this guy, there it is, right there.
Okay.
So this guy has made like literally a huge camp for himself. It's constantly changing. He definitely has some like mental health problems. You can actually see him in this picture. He's wearing the plaid and he's face down in the middle of his encampment. You can also see that there's bits of trees everywhere. That tree was actually up and erect like 2 days before. I'm not sure if the tree was dead and he cut it down or whether or not something happened, but the day after this, the pieces of that tree were actually up in the tree beside him. That's on the top right of this frame. So these encampments are like constantly changing. It's absolutely wild. And I think it's good for him to be in this spot because people can see him, come and like offer him food, see if he needs any help. And one day when I was driving home from work and past him, I saw the city right beside him with a dump truck and 4 people. And I, for a second, was really scared because I had seen this guy now for like 5 months, survive through the winter. This photo was taken like not even a week ago. So this guy has made it through the winter in this little like patch of grass. He has been covered in snow, right? It's been minus 20 and it's been, I'm sure, like a wild roller coaster for him. So for me, seeing his encampment potentially like discarded or taken away by the city, I was worried for him for a second because I've got emotionally attached to, to the story and to this person. And the city came and took all of his garbage and left his like tent and all the amazing like tarp supplies and that kind of stuff, and left him there to continue to exist. So I was so happy and relieved to see that, because I was worried that the visibility of the road would, of course, attract more visibility to various institutions.
Do you know how old Dimitri is?
I don't.
Okay.
But he looks like he's in his 30s.
Did you come across, was there like a not an average age, but a common age? Like, did you see patterns in the ages of people there, or was it just every walk of life?
We've got everyone. One of the quotes that was super powerful that I'm using in the project was too young to prostitute, too honest to steal. And named Alyssa shared that, and it really hit home with me. And one of the things in the community aspect that you mentioned earlier was like there was no common grounds to these groups of friends. You saw every single race, every single type of kind of, I'd say, like background orientation. It's hard to tell because people aren't wearing the normal clothes signifiers that we're used to seeing in like everyday society. Someone might be wearing a Leafs jersey, not because they're a Leafs fan, but because that is what was either donated to them or they could trade for or they could find. But ultimately, you've got old people, young people, people from all different cultures, people of different accents, and they're all in it together.
Outside of actual money, do they have like you said, something that they could trade for? So is it like their currency? Is it like a barter system? Like you can trade up for warmer gear, warmer boots, or whatever it is that you're.
Yeah, everything from food to gear. I'm sure there's also like other substances involved that they have in their economy. If you can physically present it to someone, it can be traded. The risk with that is that if you can present something physically, you could also be stolen from or like experience theft. So I think there's like a fine line too in the trust in the communities is that you're not just going to like offer anyone up a random trade, because you also don't want to get mugged and then end up with nothing.
Yeah, I was going to say, how common is that? Because you said that the communities, they support each other and stuff, but at the end of the day, it is a story of survival. So how is it very, very common for that to happen?
I can't say with any authority, but what I can share is that Dimitri, the guy that we just saw, was still talking about getting mugged by a group of other homeless people when I saw him last week. And that happened not this winter, but the winter before.
Wow.
So it definitely happens. One thing that it was interesting about his situation is that he is like a good 20 blocks from the more populated encampments that we were showing on screen earlier. So he is physically isolated because of the road in his little patch, but he also is isolated because he's not hanging out with anyone else.
Right.
I've seen him at least 10 times and never once with another person.
Right. So you did said that he survived through the winter, and that's the one thing, right? I noticed he had no gloves on, and he still seemed to have all his fingers intact. So that's pretty remarkable. But surviving in the not just in the winter where it's cold, but in the snow where it is wet as well, it's got to be terrible. So what's your experience photographing this and documenting this throughout the Hamilton winter?
Personally, it was an amazing experience, but I also felt a lot of like personal guilt from being able to put on like my Canada Goose jacket and my like Sorel boots, going out with my expensive camera to go and, document these people. There is something in my academic research that I'm really interested in talking about, and that is like art versus exploitation and the lines between that, right? We need to, as artists, make sure that when we're observers, we are just observers. That when we are going to, participate in a situation, we're not negatively leaving anyone. We also want to make sure that we're not creating like a hero's complex where we're constantly, leaving people with like large bribes to be in these photos and then leave them, and then there's a dependency on you. There's also issues of people coming basically to, help people all the time, and then they become dependent on you and you just disappear after your project is over, or after, you get involved with something else. So there's many levels of, I think, like the social rules around it. And then of course there's the physical experience of just like being cold. Like I was cold taking pictures of these guys. I don't like using gloves with my camera settings in the wintertime. I like to be able to like actually physically still touch and use my camera. And after 10 minutes, I was like, I had the thought of like, I'm cold. And I was like, I can't believe I even had that thought. Like I was ashamed of myself in that moment to even have let myself like go in that direction mentally. One of the cool things about the exhibition of these photos that I'm excited about is that I am only keeping these photos up for 2 hours. In Hamilton, in the depths of our coldest winters, if you do not have any shelter, clothing, protection, personal protective gear from the elements, you can be dead within 2 hours on the street. So I really wanted to give pause to that and let the people know at the exhibition that, this is a real thing, right? We are seeing actual real photographs of real people. This is a place that we live in. Excuse me. And this is an issue, like right now. Like it's wintertime, we're all inside with heat, and these people are literally dying on the streets of exposure. That happened over Christmas time. We had a huge storm in Ontario, and we lost people throughout the storm because there wasn't enough access to heat, right? And like those are little things that I think as a municipality, we should be able to fight more with warming centers. The city of Toronto recently had like a reduction in the funding for warming centers and an increase in the funding for some police access and like police funds. So as a collective, I think we also need to be seeing where, we can help, where we can get involved, how we're voting even. There's the winter is unforgiving and people literally die. Like the fact that the snow is even in that photo is amazing, but it's not showing how like heavy and wet and blustery it is. It's hard. It's a really, really hard life to be out there through the winter time.
I was just thinking of a ripple effect too. There's all sorts of cause and effect, right? There's all sorts of cause for example, in the like TTC, whatever we're reading about, like all the violence on public transit. But you talked about closing down warming centers, not having the funding for places for people to go to get warm or to get shelter. That's going to push them into public warm areas, right? So when you mentioned people maybe with mental health issues or addictions, and you kind of force them to go to where everybody else is, where it's warm, then that can exacerbate the issue even further. Yeah.
Yeah. There's two different things that happen when those things happen. One, visibility, right? These people are living invisible lives, and visibility is one of the reasons that I wanted to document these people and share their experience. But also with that visibility can potentially come with like reinforcing stereotypes and reinforcing the social class system that we live in. So everything is a blessing and a curse. Maybe in a situation where someone needs someone or sees someone that needs help, someone who's more fortunate could help someone who's less fortunate, amazing, fantastic. But also there's the situation of, someone trying to shield their kid, from going near someone who's unhoused, or shielding their kid from someone who they think might be in like an altered state of reality. And then they're telling their kid like, oh, that's a dirty person, or don't talk to them, they're dangerous. And now those stereotypes are being ingrained in the next generation. So it's a delicate thing, especially when it's freezing. Like I said earlier, these winters are hard. And that reminded me of one of the quotes from the people, where they said, these winters are hard. Even if you are surviving, you are alone. Surviving is having to live more. And it's interesting to me that there's this notion sometimes of like, oh, I wish I had the balls to kill myself. That was something that I felt from these people, like multiple occasions. Some people are more flat out about it. Like one person was just like, yeah, not having a roof, not having a floor, it really sucks. But then someone else who was slightly more graceful in their language, and said, I wish I wasn't so afraid of death. And it's telling of the experience.
Yeah. You talk about the freezing cold in the winter and surviving through and surviving alone and being invisible, but they're obviously right here. They're right in front of your face.
Yeah.
But it's like an intentional blindness, right? We don't want to see it, so it's not there.
I completely agree.
Is this where's this one?
So the YMCA is on the left here.
This is the YMCA. Okay.
The tunnel that got closed down that I mentioned earlier is straightforward through those lights. And then that longer encampment area where you could see like 5 or 6 tents before, down the kind of like a double walled alley is just up to the right.
Okay.
So this entire like square block, really like 2 square blocks up to City Hall, is where a huge population of these people are, coming together to stay and live. On average in Hamilton, I think there's 150 people in this particular area every night that are living unhoused. That's a lot.
Do you know what the official numbers are statistically in terms of homeless people in your area?
They're changing all the time. The 150 a night is something that is like in this area, they've been able to quantify it. We know that around the YMCA, the people that are being, helped, there's 150 of them that come for daily supplies or that live like in this area and access supports. One of the hardest things about getting concrete statistics is that these people are invisible. They're trying to be invisible, or we are not giving them the access to visibility. People aren't coming to report with their ID or their health card, right, that they are trying to get access to things.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of know more like general numbers. The police know numbers from giving tickets or for having interactions. Coast as well, they're a mental health support group. They have their own numbers as well, but we don't have, it's unfortunate that we don't have like a larger sharing system for this information. But at the end of the day, like nobody cares enough to do that, right? It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money to put in the infrastructure to collect that kind of data. And you're not going to be collecting this data to go make money. Mm-hmm. So it's very undesirable to a lot of people.
Yeah, I see these photos, I see this project, and it does get me upset because, I mean, there's a lot, without trying to get political, because I try to stay apolitical on the podcast, but there's a lot of money that goes out to things that maybe doesn't need to go to, because we have a lot of issues like this right here that we are turning a blind eye to, or pulling funding from, which is causing greater issues. But the money that came from there is now going to somewhere else where it's not really needed, and we're just kind of I don't know. We're trying to empty the water out of the boat with a thimble, it seems.
Hopefully in the future, like societally, we can work on like preventative healthcare, both physical healthcare and mental healthcare, so that we can stop these people from having to struggle to survive on the streets. Mm-hmm. That is like, of course, a fantasy of Kendra's that like won't ever be like maintained in this or attained in this lifetime. But ideally, it wouldn't get this far, right? There's always going to be issues with mental health. There's always going to be issues with addiction. There's people that don't have support financially. Those are some of the common causes. Trauma, you mentioned, is a huge one, that really put people in like the crosshairs to live this kind of like struggled life. But the more the support and the more access to support that we can give people before they get there, whether or not that be to like keep them in their homes or to give them mental health supports, sending people to therapy or rehab, whatever it is that they want, that they need or are willing to receive at that time. I hope and would like to believe that the more that we can do those things, the more that we can prevent, so many people living unhoused every single day.
Mm-hmm. And as a photographer, like you're doing with this project, you can force people to look at these uncomfortable things and be confronted with these uncomfortable things by just putting it in their face and saying, you need to see this.
Yeah. That was something that was important to me for sure.
Let's talk about your exhibit a little bit. So you have an exhibit coming up where you're going to be showing this for 2 hours. And this is a part of a master's program. Can you talk about kind of this whole aspect?
I wanted to not just put these images up online. I was taking these images as part of research for my master's that I wanted to research more. And as I took the images and immersed myself and spent hours at a time with these people out on the street, I found myself being just innately more passionate about it, and wanting to learn more and wanting to help. And I was like, okay, well, if I have lived part of their life, even for just a second, and feel this spark or this like passion to want to do something, maybe if I can position these photos to where other people can see them, they also might want to help in some way. You know, sometimes help is just visibility, like sharing a photo. Sometimes help is, you know, actually physically helping, either financially or going to show up somewhere to help someone. Sometimes helping is, you know, giving a person a second chance when you think that, you know, you're at the end of the rope and you're about to kick them out on the street or whatever it is. So I really wanted to be able to try and attempt to make some social change with the project as well. It's never, I think the goal of a photo being taken to show no one. I think that we do take a lot of photos just for archival purposes, but I wanted to make these photos more just about an archival shot of their experience of life. I wanted to be able to use them for a little bit of change. I tried to not edit anything but like a little bit of color, so that everything in these photos were authentic. They're not illustrations.
Mm-hmm. When, where, like, what's all the details for your showing?
On April the 23rd, which is Sunday, we're going to be at Millworks in Dundas. And I'll toss you a little link, and that I can share when I share the podcast in case anybody wants to grab a ticket. It's free. You cannot purchase the art. The pictures themselves are not for sale. That's like not what this is about. If anyone does want to get involved, they could make a donation to a variety of resources. I'm also going to be in the website that I'm sharing with these photos and with my actual academic research. I'm going to be sharing a page of resources that is for people who want to get involved and help. And I'm also sharing a page of resources for people that need help. There was like some curiosity about the project from the homeless people on the street. And some of the unhoused were like, oh, where is this going? Like, are you going to print any of them? Where can I see it? And I was like, oh my gosh, you guys might be able to, access things and maybe even see an avenue for help that you didn't realize, and being able to potentially like pay them back in some way for letting me capture them and letting me kind of like listen to their story and invade in their lives a little bit. I was like, oh, we definitely have to include that as well. So it's going to be kind of like a multi-tiered thing. So I'd be happy to share it. Awesome.
Kendra, I appreciate you coming on today to share your work and to talk about your project. And I'm excited for you to have your showing, and I'll have to touch base with you. And you have to let me know how it went after the fact.
I look forward to it. I can't wait to chat with you again. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with me and giving this a platform today.
No worries, Kendra. I appreciate you. Have a good one.
Thank you.